The Prime Minister in Rome on this Saturday night. The pivotal meetings with European leaders setting the stage for the G7 summit in Canada.
We can bring the G7 to a new level.
As Russia's war in Ukraine also dominates the agenda. More than 24 tornadoes rip through the U.S.
This was my dressing room.
The path of destruction, the cleanup, and the storms next in the forecast. Heading outside this long weekend? Ticks are too. The advice you need to stay safe. And they were kicked out of Major League Baseball for betting on their own sport. How the league is now showing forgiveness after death.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. In his first overseas trip since being elected, Prime Minister Mark Carney held crucial meetings with world leaders in Rome today. Many heads of state have gathered there for Pope Leo's inauguration tomorrow. But with Russia's war on Ukraine raging on and continuing threats from the U.S. president, the event is a rare opportunity to strengthen ties with allies. Mackenzie Gray is traveling with the Prime Minister and has our top story tonight.
The Italian Prime Minister bringing out the band for Mark Carney, welcoming him to Rome. Congratulating Carney and Canada on hosting the G7 this year in what Giorgia Meloni called a difficult period.
With the partnership between Italy, your leadership, our partnership, we can bring the G7 to a new level. Mr. President.
Reaching that level hampered by conflicts like Ukraine.
The Canadian people stand in steadfast and unwavering support of your leadership, of the people of Ukraine.
At Carney and Zelensky's first in-person meeting, they traded invitations. The president inviting Carney to Ukraine, and Zelensky set to come to the G7 next month in Alberta, where ending the war will be a central topic.
We have to make more pressure on Russia, on Putin, to make peace as quick as possible.
Peace still elusive as the Russian president skipped recent talks in Turkey to try and find a ceasefire.
We really waited for Putin and he didn't come. We think that he's afraid of bilateral, just direct talks.
Russia has continued to hammer Ukraine, the latest attack on a passenger van. According to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, it killed 9 civilians and injured 7.
I want to thank you for your leadership.
Carney's meetings, including with the European Union, setting the groundwork for the G7, but also likely strategizing on how to deal with Donald Trump.
I expect that they'll share notes about how their respective countries are managing relations with the United States.
The main reason for Carney's trip is to come here to the Vatican, where on Sunday morning he'll attend the inauguration of Pope Leo, Carolyn, along with Canadian religious and Indigenous leaders, as well as 13 Liberal MPs.
Mackenzie Gray in Rome, thank you. Pope Leo is calling for peace in Gaza as well. Ceasefire talks resumed in Qatar today, despite Israel ramping up its bombardment, killing more than 300 people in Gaza since Thursday. Israel also launched the first phase of a ground assault, mobilizing its military to seize strategic areas of Gaza and eliminate Hamas. As Nathaniel Dove reports, there are fears Israel could be planning a larger-scale invasion.
Israel pummeling Gaza with some of the heaviest bombing since the war began. Allahu Akbar. The strikes reportedly killing hundreds. Even tents were bombed. This woman says her family has no food or water left. The Israeli military released footage of what it says is an operation already underway after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced Israel could seize the territory to ensure security.
He was very clear from the very beginning, as was his right-wing cabinet, that there was a plan approved for re-annexing Gaza.
Expert Marissa Korma says an invasion is likely. NBC News is reporting the White House is discussing a plan to permanently relocate up to 1 million Palestinians in Libya. A former ambassador to Israel states it would be against their will.
You're talking about another war crime, which would be essentially ethnically cleansing.
I am alarmed by reported plans by Israel to expand ground operations and more.
In Baghdad, the UN Secretary General called for aid to Gaza to resume, while Arab leaders called on Donald Trump to restrain Netanyahu.
The only partner that can stop Israel from moving forward full throttle with its plans in Gaza is the United States.
But Trump returned from the Middle East without visiting Israel.
There have been a really significant number of times that the Israelis have either been left out of conversations or have been snubbed.
Putting Israeli troops permanently in Gaza, Allen says, would lead Israel down a very dangerous path.
We're going to see a lot more death and destruction.
Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Toronto.
Cities across the United States are dealing with the aftermath of deadly storms that claimed the lives of more than 20 people. Communities in the South and Midwest have been most affected, with officials warning the death toll could rise in the coming days. Candace Cole is in Washington with more on the storm's impact and the severe weather that's still to come.
We were in the bedroom. I was sitting with my laptop about to do some work this afternoon, and the sirens came on.
That's Joan Miller describing the harrowing moments right before a deadly twister tore apart her St. Louis home as she and her husband just barely made it to safety.
Suddenly, all the doors shut, the windows flew out from the bedroom. This is was my dressing room, and you can see straight into the alley now.
And Onita Williams, who was stuck at a traffic light when the tornado touched down.
And I just started praying, and after a few minutes, I heard something hit my car, and I turned around to look, and the tree wood had fallen on top of my car. Every window in that car probably broke except for the driver's side. So when I tell you God is good, God is good.
In Missouri alone, officials say about 5,000 buildings were destroyed, and over 600,000 people are now without power after a multitude of tornadoes and severe storms hit across the country Friday. In Kentucky, Leslie White's family narrowly escaped after a violent tornado destroyed her house.
We went to the hallway, and we were in there maybe, 2 minutes, and then my husband and my son come running in and pretty much jumped on top of her because you could feel the air and everything suck in, and it sounded like a train. And then we saw stuff falling, and next thing we knew, he said most of the house was gone.
In Wisconsin, softball-sized hail pummeled part of the state, and storm damage in Michigan left parts of West Holland unrecognizable. In all, some 28 tornadoes were reported Friday. At least 15 states have reported storm-related damage. Now, the National Weather Service warns of severe storms from Texas to Louisiana. Parts of the Northeast could also be impacted. Candace Cole, Global News, Washington.
In Manitoba, rain is helping in the fight against multiple wildfires across the province. However, the conditions have not dramatically improved in Lac du Bonnet, where 2 people died and 28 homes were destroyed earlier this week. Crews are still working to contain fires nearby. Evacuation orders remain in place for hundreds of residents, though some have been allowed to return to certain areas.
It creates some confusion for the residents, and we're getting a lot of calls of that nature as well. So, and that, you know what, that's fine. But you know, we ask for everybody to be understanding and be patient as we work our way through this.
More than 15 wildfires are burning across the province, with the largest near Nopaming Provincial Park, covering about 100,000 hectares. Police in Pictou County, Nova Scotia, continued the search today for 2 young children who've been missing for over 2 weeks. 6-year-old Lily Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack were reported missing on May 2nd. Today, a renewed ground and air search focused on specific areas near the mobile home where they were living with their mother and stepfather, about 140 kilometers northeast of Halifax. An initial search was scaled back 5 days after the siblings disappeared, when investigators determined there was little chance the kids could have survived in the heavily wooded area. Liberal MP David McGuinty faces some big challenges as Canada's newly appointed defence minister, perhaps one of the most contentious portfolios in Mark Carney's new government. On its to-do list, improving pay and benefits for armed forces personnel and pushing for the purchase of billions in new equipment, all promises made during the Liberal campaign. So, where will he begin? That's something our Mercedes Stevenson will be looking into on the West Block this week. Mercedes.
Carolyn, with the election over, Prime Minister Mark Carney's cabinet has no shortage of issues to deal with. One of the biggest is defense, a topic that became an election issue for the first time in decades. Throughout the campaign, Mark Carney promised to tackle Canada's lackluster military capabilities and lack of defense spending head on, a promise that was reiterated after being elected. This week on the West Block, we sat down with former Conservative leader and ex-Royal Canadian Air Force officer Aaron O'Toole. He spoke about what needs to happen on the defense file sooner rather than later.
Yeah, finally, defense is a top issue and I'm gone. I wish I was still there, but I thought there was good things in both policies. I think the Conservatives' policies, many of which I advocated for, set the tone, and Prime Minister Carney tried to meet that. I'd like to see the submarine RFP roll out quite quickly. We need more surveillance in the Arctic. They announced the Jorn project with Australia, but we need subsea cables. We need to know who's in our Arctic now. We can't even answer that question.
We'll also talk to Aaron O'Toole about the national unity threat Canada is facing as Western alienation grows, and we'll get his thought on the election. Were there lessons learned for the Conservatives, and did the results leave him feeling vindicated about the way that he decided to campaign? Carolyn?
Thanks, Mercedes. And you can watch the entire interview with Aaron O'Toole tomorrow morning on the West Block, right here on Global. For many, this weekend marks the unofficial start to summer, and that also means tick season coming up. What you can do to protect yourself and track where they're being spotted. With summer just around the corner, many Canadians are looking forward to getting outside, but that also means an increased risk of encountering ticks. Summer is peak season for the parasites. Catherine Ward looks at what you can do to protect yourself.
Ticks are jumping up in more regions across the country.
Because the climate is a lot warmer, we now have more black-legged ticks, but we also have them in more areas.
When temperatures climb to 4 degrees Celsius and above, these tiny creatures get on the move, looking for their first meals of the season. There are many ways ticks can get around.
These ticks come off migratory birds and get moved around by small mammals such as mice or other types of rodents, and even on deer. You can find them in any of those kind of brushy areas in Ontario.
This is the time of year when sightings start to climb, with the peak of the season towards the end of May and the first part of June.
Last year, we had over 15,000 submissions.
Jeremy Buffard is the project coordinator for the online platform eTick. People can snap pictures and upload them for identification.
And in return, they receive information on the species they encountered regarding the risk they may pose that is specific to their province of residence.
There is also a tick tool that allows people to access information about tick sightings through an interactive map and detailed information right down to their neighborhood.
It allows us to see how the tick populations are changing over time in terms of their distribution. It can help policymakers and researchers find areas that are maybe now at risk.
Given the risk these disease-carrying arachnids can pose, vigilance is key.
For people, the best things to do is to use insect repellents that are good against ticks. And then generally being aware of where ticks are so you can try to avoid their habitats, and doing very frequent tick checks when you are in those habitats so that if they do get on your clothes or on your body, you can catch them hopefully before they embed.
Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, the fight in the skies over Ukraine and Russia. How 2 Quebec men are providing support from here in Canada. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will be speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday to discuss an end to the war in Ukraine. Trump says the call will be focused on stopping the bloodbath that is killing on average more than 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers a week. Next, he said he will speak with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and some NATO leaders. This comes after Ukrainian and Russian negotiators met on Friday in Istanbul and agreed to a prisoner swap. Negotiators were unable to reach a deal on a permanent ceasefire, though, meaning the fighting continues, including a deadly Russian drone strike just this morning. Drones have become a central weapon in this war, which is why 2 Canadian men with experience in Ukraine are looking to support that fight in the skies. Dan Spector reports.
You're putting it at 90 degrees to your target.
2 Quebecers who have risked their lives fighting for Ukraine on the front lines of the war with Russia talk about the weapon that has become ubiquitous in the conflict.
Drones, when I was there at the front line, actually saved my life.
He's known as Wally. The elite sniper has done tours in Afghanistan and Iraq for the Canadian Forces and volunteered his services to the Ukrainian army in 2022.
Every day at the front was like almost like getting killed. Like it was so intense.
This Montreal area man, a paramedic and drone pilot who wants to be known as Star Pure, says he's been to Ukraine 3 times helping train soldiers to use drones in the war effort.
Looking for targets with ISR drones and actually going after them.
The conflict has launched a new era of drone warfare as the remotely piloted machines buzz over enemy lines to drop explosives. Ukraine went from producing a few thousand drones in 2022 to a goal of 4 million this year.
You know, a $400 or $500 drone could blow up a $4 to $5 million Russian tank.
Many of the drones used by Ukraine are produced by private entities. One of them is the Wild Hornets, a non-profit operating in the Kyiv area that relies on donations to produce tens of thousands of drones. In many cases, military units buy directly from them instead of waiting for government arms.
Everything is so quicker when you ask the civilians because the army is just slow moving. So we have this culture of we don't wait.
The two men are championing a Montreal fundraiser for Wild Hornets Saturday evening. Similar events in Toronto recently brought in $80,000.
Every dollar counts and every drone counts because it saves Ukrainian lives.
Ukrainians are poor, soldiers are poor, everybody is like struggling, but everybody knows that it's necessary.
Wally has little faith in a lasting ceasefire being implemented anytime soon. He still checks in with friends on the front line weekly and would be willing to fight alongside them again in a heartbeat.
Yes, of course, I'm open to help them again.
But right now, they don't want his boots on the ground. They want help putting more drones in the sky. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
A massive fire has engulfed South Korea's largest tire factory. Fire officials are warning the blaze could burn for several days. Close to 100 fire trucks have been deployed. 1 employee and 2 firefighters have been injured. Next, once disgraced, now welcomed back. How Major League Baseball is changing the rules for past players. Major League Baseball made an historic policy change this week, reinstating deceased players who were banned from the league. 17 players fall into this category, including Pete Rose, one of the greatest players of all time, whose legacy was stained by gambling. Eric Sorensen takes a look at what the MLB's decision could mean for the future of baseball.
From Shaw into left center. There it is.
Pete Rose was simply one of the best hitters of all time. He played with reckless abandon, and fans loved him for it. But late in his career and as a manager, he bet on games. He was caught, and he was banned from baseball for life. Only years later did he admit to gambling in his autobiography and to ABC's Charlie Gibson.
Did you bet on baseball? Yes, I did, and that was my mistake.
He said he never bet against his own team, but there was little sympathy in a sport for which gambling was the ultimate sin.
Here are leading investigators in probe of recently finished World Series.
Baseball could not forgive betting because 100 years ago, 8 Chicago White Sox players were paid to lose the World Series, including the great shoeless Joe Jackson.
It's said that one weeping fan of his cried out, "Say it isn't so."
Baseball, 1919. Hollywood has told the story in several films, including 8 Men Out.
Pitcher Eddie Saccott lost 2 games in that infamous 1919 World Series. He was also the first of the 8 players to come forward and confess that he threw the games.
The players were acquitted in court anyway, but a new commissioner with sweeping powers banned them all.
Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, High Commissioner of National Pastime, and he brought baseball back.
70 years later, Rose suffered the same fate. But after he passed away last year, the current commissioner, Rob Manfred, concluded, obviously a person no longer with us cannot represent a threat to the integrity of the game. Rose's attorney says reinstatement was overdue.
He went through life as the scarlet letter of what happens when you bet. You couldn't face a bigger price than he did.
Through the years, fans still wanted Pete Rose autographs, and while problem gambling is more understood today, Rose just wanted forgiveness.
I want baseball and Pete Rose to be friends. That's all I want so I can say I'm not an outsider looking in.
The Hall of Fame's Historical Overview Committee will consider Shoeless Joe, Pete Rose, and the others in 2027. Plenty of time to debate whether great players who cheated the game should ever be enshrined in Cooperstown. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada showcases a cul-de-sac in Edmonton, Lafarge Lake in Coquitlam, BC, and Peterborough, Ontario's City Hall. Keep sending your pictures of Canadian pride to Global National at globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.